welcome. You're listening to a special episode of TOI Bookmark for AutHer Awards Season 7. I'm Jaya Bhattacharji Rose. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Poonam Saxena. Poonam is a journalist, writer, and translator. She studied in Delhi and did her BA and MA in history from St. Stephen's College. She went on to do an MPhil from Delhi University, but she's had a distinguished career in journalism. She has written extensively on popular culture, film, television, books, and Hindi literature. Now she translates from Hindi to English, and her translations include Dharamveer Bharati's Gunah Ka Devta, Masum Raza's Scene 75, The Greatest Hindi Stories Ever Told, and Kayas by Udayan Vajpayee. She's also the co author for filmmaker Karan Johar's memoir, An Unsuitable Boy. But recently, she has translated the memoirs of two leading Hindi writers and a couple, Manu Bhandari, This Too Is a Story, and Rajendra Yadav, Echoes of My Past. Both have been published by Penguin Random House India. But we are here today to discuss Manu Bhandari's moving, and very disturbing memoir, This Too Is a Story. Welcome, Poonam. Welcome to TOI Bookmark.
Hi, Jaya. Thank you for having me. It becomes a passion, I can tell you, Jaya. When I started my first translation, I didn't think it would end up into this, long affair. And now I can't seem to stop. But actually, I do take time over my translations. I mean, I've realized that it took me more than 4 years to do these two books. So it was quite a long passion project, and I was very immersed in their lives and their writings, and it was quite wonderful, actually.
Well, I mean, I'm frankly, after having read the memoirs, I'm I am astonished at your stamina at having done these two memoirs together and worked at it. It's just must have required a certain amount of, I don't know, an inner strength.
So here's the thing: when I first read Manuji's memoir in Hindi, and I read it almost in one sitting, I think, and I found it extremely moving and very gripping, and very emotional. And because there's so much of a memoir is about her husband Rajendra Yadav, who himself was a brilliant writer, and writing is what drew them together, actually. I i wanted to know about him. I had read his short stories, I had read his novels, but then I found that he had written a memoir too. So I then read that, and though of course his memoir is very different from Manuji's memoir, and it's not a linear story, and he doesn't dwell on her as much as she dwells on him, and he talks about all sorts of things. But however, he does of course mention her, and you get an insight into his mind and his, what kind of a man he was, what were the things that drove him. So read together, I felt the two memoirs give us a very fascinating insight into two writers who married each other and could not live happily. And after 35 years of marriage, Manuji told him to leave. And they separated when they were in their 60s, and they had a grown up daughter. So I felt if you read the memoirs together, you get this complete picture, and it's quite rare to actually have that. So I decided very ambitiously that I was going to translate both of them, and the books should come out simultaneously, and they should be like companion volumes. And therefore, I began the process, and Manuji's book was, as all translations are, it was a challenge. But the book that really made me weep tears of blood was actually Rajendra Yadav's book, because it's very abstract. There are a lot of inner reflections on what it is to be a writer, and comments on all kinds of things, from the literary milieu around him to his inner thoughts. And a lot of the times the language is like Rajendraji himself. It's complex. There's a lot of surreal imagery. So that book was. really a tough book to translate, but it was very rewarding. And I was determined I was going to do the two together. So I kind of kept at it.
Well, the discipline of determination is something I probably, being a journalist, must have helped. You have a deadline, meet it, you know?
You're so right, Jaya. You are so right. I actually trace it back to two things. One is, I think, studying in a convent school, where if you had homework, you had to finish it and give it to your teacher. You could not say, "Oh, I did not do my homework." And secondly, where, as you said, when you're a journalist, if you have a deadline, you have to write and finish and give it in, because there can't be a blank page in the newspaper or magazine, right? So that discipline is there. However, with books, I think there's an extra layer of discipline because the whole process is so long drawn out that a lot of people may flag along the way and just say, "Oh, it's too much," you know. But I just go on with this dogged perseverance and I stop only when it's done.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact you made a very interesting observation about the two memoirs, that Manu Bhandari's has that linear narrative, which of course then she puts an afterword where she tries to update herself. And your insistence on publishing them as companion volumes, I don't know whether when the original Hindi editions came out, whether they were published simultaneously or in the same year. They are also very, very different styles. But the bracketing of her memoir with the assertion that I will write, मैं लिखूंगी, and then that last line of that memoir. Oh my goodness me! It's up there at the same level as Ibsen's Dollhouse's famous last screen directive. The door slamming and walking out of the house. Manu Bhandari's, by saying, if I may be permitted to quote, who knows, they might not believe any of it. It could be that Rajendra too will be quite hurt. But he's the one who first scraped off the scabs that had covered old wounds over a period of time by writing about all this in his memoirs from his point of view. Maybe he forgot that nothing except pus oozes from wounds that have been scraped. Wow. Wow. What a thing and a half. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. I was amazed at your stamina to write and to translate something like this. I- the original Hindi must have been extremely powerful.
So, Jaya, actually, she was working on her memoirs for many years and then she wrote them. And meanwhile, Rajendraji wrote his memoir where he said a lot of things which Manuji, as she says, she had out of kind of hesitation to keep certain parts of her life private, and because she found it humiliating to talk about them, she didn't write about them. But once he had written, then she wrote her afterward and said that now you have said what you had to, but I feel I should clear the air and give my point of view, and I'm only going to state facts. So then she put in the afterword. So her memoir, in that sense, was a kind. His memoir was a trigger for her to finish hers, and have her say also on matters which she had actually not written about in the main memoir at all. It's in the afterword that she addresses them. She has only obliquely referred to some of those things in the main book.
Yeah, and in fact, the structure of her memoir, starting with the title "Ek Kahani Yeh Bhi," or "This Too Is a Story." Then the first, within the opening lines, it is "मैं लिखूंगी," I will write, and then it ends with this afterword. And in between, she writes in this way where she is documenting her life, trying to be objective, but you keep thinking, oh my goodness me, you've already said that I do not, or I think you mentioned it in your translator's note. She never wanted to be bracketed as a woman writer. And yet the minuteness with which she can see the details and the hypocrisy between the man and the woman operating is is tremendous.
She actually did not like to be bracketed as a woman writer at all. But unfortunately, I mean, for her, a lot of women who write short stories and novels, who write fiction and who do write about women's lives, they just get pigeonholed like that. But I mean, we shouldn't forget that she wrote two extremely powerful novels. One is called Aapka Banti, which is about a 9-year-old boy whose parents have divorced and remarried. And he is an extremely traumatized and unhappy little boy who feels he doesn't belong in either household. So that book is this very granular and close look at his what he's going through, what he's feeling. The next book is this very potent and hard hitting political novel, which was, she sort of wrote it because she read about the Belchi massacre in the 70s, and she was so disturbed by it that she wanted to do a book. And then she took her time to work out a structure. And I think it's one of the best political novels that we have. And it's a sad novel because, in the end, the perpetrators are triumphant and go scot free, and the victims are the ones who are punished. So, so that is not the work of a woman writer. I mean, she's marching into a domain where, she's not expected to. And then the book was made into a play, which was performed by the National School of Drama and directed by Amal Alana, which had this enormously successful run, and is still performed even today very often by theatre groups across the country.
I like the way that you clarified that she didn't want to be known as a woman writer. She constantly asserts itself in different ways throughout the memoir. Yet she is seen to be a part of the Nai Kahani movement, which takes pride in doing exactly this, of documenting the smaller details of ordinary life. You know, it's amazing.
The Nai Kahani movement is a movement in Hindi literature which is very close to my heart. And it was actually spearheaded by three men, which is Rajendra Yadav and Kamleshwar and Mohan Rakesh, three extremely talented men. And they were the post-independence generation. And they moved away from writing about villages about which they didn't really know much. And they wrote urban stories, and they wrote stories about all the anxieties of the post-independence generation, about the breakdown of the joint family, about moving from small towns and kasbahs into big cities, and of the changing nature of men and women, their relationships. And they were big champions of women's equality and so on. And they breathed new life into this movement, and Manuji was very much a part of this movement. And they wrote about middle class lives in big cities, and they wrote about the struggles of the monetary struggles families had, the suffocation that women often felt in these kind of families. Manuji wrote about women who rebelled. She wrote about women who had to give up their careers for their husbands. She wrote about unfulfilled women. She wrote about all kinds of things. And she also wrote the other stories. She's a very fine writer. I'm a big fan of her work. I really love her story. Very brilliant, and she was a very instinctive writer. She never labored over her stories. They just came out in a rush, and they came from her heart. It was only in the later years of her life, when somehow her creativity kind of dried up and she found she couldn't write. She struggled, she would begin something and not finish it. And it really upset her a lot. And it was something that troubled her till the end of her life, actually.
That she keeps talking about, and you also make many references to it, and you even recall her daughter Rachna Yadav talking about it. And it's a very sad part, because you realize that, given the kind of eye she has for detail, and a gentleness with which she presents the most uh, horrific action in daily existence, daily life, like ignoring her when she has an ulcerous mouth, or ignoring her sick daughter by this brilliant husband of hers, or telling lies on about her. And I mean, it's just it's just so demeaning. and she puts it all down, it I'm sure it will resonate with a lot of readers, but I couldn't help but wonder, since you've read all 50 of her short stories, does her short story writing sort of mimic some of what she writes in the style, I mean, of her memoir, and vice versa, or are they very different ways of writing?
So first, I just want to say that yes, she had a very difficult marriage, and it was a painful marriage. But we shouldn't forget it sounds perhaps strange, but to me it's not strange at all. At one point, I don't know if you remember, she says in the book that all right, Rajendra had his faults, and I was often upset by his behavior, but I was an independent working woman. I was teaching in a college. I was a very successful writer. I was a very popular writer. Why couldn't I just walk out and leave him earlier? Why did it take me 35 years to do that? And she answers it also. She says, Mujhe Rajendra se prem tha. She did love her husband. So relationships are complicated. And also, I do want to say, which she acknowledges again and again, he was the biggest champion of her writing. You would imagine, I mean, you hear stories of a lot of men who are envious and jealous of their wife's success and who can't take it. But he was the complete opposite. He was very proud of her. He was in awe of her. He thought she was just brilliant. And he always encouraged her to write. And he was always telling her, Manu, write more, finish that novel, finish that story. When he launched Hans for the inaugural issue, he insisted that he had to have a short story by her. And about her writing, her memoir is written in the same way she writes her stories. It's very straightforward, very honest, but it kind of reaches out to you emotionally, um, very powerfully.
That's exactly what I wanted to know. That straightforward, it's not exactly blunt, but it is a way of stating facts, sharing facts, showing the facts, and putting it down as a story. You know, putting it down as a story, and and she never comments on the horror of what she has experienced, but she does assert the over and over again that she was responsible for running the household. She was financially independent. She was responsible for everything, and yet she was constantly being taken for granted. The story of many a household, I think, today, even today, you know.
A lot of her stories, she drew them from real life also, from her childhood years in Ajmer and later. In fact, she often wrote stories which, were sometimes just taken from her life with Rajendra ji. But he never minded. He never told her, "Aisa kyun kiya?" I think she was stoic, and I think she did look up to her brilliant husband also, just the way he looked up to her. I think at the end of the day, Jaya, what happens sometimes is two people who should not marry get married. you know, they want very different things from their life. Manuji was a fabulous writer, and she really wanted, completely understandably, she wanted a husband who was devoted to her, who was interested in the house, who was interested in bringing up their child, who was a kind of loving and dedicated husband. Rajendra ji was a free spirit. He did not he did not want to be shackled by domesticity in any way. He saw himself as somebody who craved a kind of bohemian lifestyle. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. You want a well run household, a well oiled household with all the comforts, and yet you want to live in your completely free, unrestricted way. So when they finally separated, he was on his own and she was on her own. And actually, their relationship improved. When she was not well, he would come and take her, to the doctor. He was, and towards the end of his life, he was very regretful, and he felt he had wronged her and he had been unjust to her, and he felt very guilty, but it was too late. I mean, it was too little and it was too late.
Yeah, and she points it out. When she is obviously, I think she, looking at the timelines, she began writing this memoir upon her retirement from Miranda House as a professor. And when she's remembering things of the past, she's obviously selective. But one of the things which pains her is how he took away some of her stories, or struck a publishing deal based upon that, oh, he knew that of an unpublished novel in progress, and he said, why don't you convert that? Or he did a publishing deal and never told her that he had got royalties in advance, an advance against royalties, and he was going to fritter it away and so she documents the pain there. It's a bittersweet pain you know
Jaya, the funny thing is, if you remember, she of course documents the pain, but she's it's so marvelous. She often says, "Today, when I look back, I feel like laughing." But she said I mean, at various things, and how silly I was, or that whole thing was so absurd, or whatever. But she said at that time it was very difficult for me. It was very painful. So she does. Document the pain. And about this her work, so I think there are two instances. One instance is when they do a novel together. They write a novel together, which is called Ek Inch Muskan. And he says that you have this incomplete novel, let's take that. And she says, Q, why should I give you my, incomplete novel? I'll complete it one day. And he says, you never will. You've just been sitting on it for so long. So why don't we take that? Anyway, finally she agrees and they write this quite amazing novel. In fact, I've read it. Of course, I've read it. And they write this fairly wonderful novel, which, does very well. And her chapters in the novel do better than his chapters with readers, so her editor tells her, because it's serialized in this magazine, Gyano there. So that she says, well, look, in the end, I did give it of my own volition. So I can't, say anything. But she's upset because he takes some stories of hers and puts them together in this volume with his stories and publishes them and doesn't tell her about it. And then, takes the advance and pushes off somewhere. And she also writes about a short story of hers, about an idea for a short story, which she kind of takes and, of course, converts into a very beautiful story called Wahan Tak Pahunchne Ki Daud. But she says that the original germ of the idea was actually mine. So, I mean, really, maybe you shouldn't have taken it. So, I think these are the three instances. One is the short story, one is the novel, to which finally she does agree to. So she says, you can't blame him. And the third is just taking some four stories of hers, taking four stories of his, putting them together in a book and not informing her about it. And she said, well, that's not right. And it isn't. I mean, she's the author of four of the stories and he didn't even ask her. He just. But
Yeah, and it's a hurt which will linger, and even if she laughs it off, because really by that point there's nothing much she can do. It is um it's a violation. It is something which is perpetuated with, and comes in with a sense of entitlement of male privilege, which she doesn't use all these words. She doesn't use any of these fancy words. She just documents the insides of a marriage, and as you rightly say, nobody knows what happened. Even those in the marriage don't know what's happening in the marriage at times. They don't know. They don't know. They're just caught in a whirlwind. They're living it.
I think she also laughs at it not because she takes it lightly, but because when she's looking back at certain incidents, they're, it's 20 years later or 30 years later or whatever. So time and distance has given her a kind of shield, which, she doesn't feel that pain or anger today as she felt so many years ago, right? And she's also a generous hearted woman. But if you remember, she she doesn't just take it quietly, she fights with him. and she tells him off, and she's not just okay fine and and she's not doing that at all. She's in this marriage, sure, and it's a difficult marriage, and in the end she does decide to end it, which by the way was not very common at that time, and she had fought with her father to marry him. And I think she one of the reasons why she hesitated was she thought that if I'm going to go and tell, say I made a mistake, it'll put this whole concept of marrying for love. People will say, देखो प्रेम विवाह में ऐसे ही होता है, that love marriages don't work, better to. And she's so against that whole idea. She feels you should find somebody of your own and you should marry for love. So she feels that she doesn't want to admit to the failure of her marriage, also, And during her marriage, with whatever happens, she doesn't hesitate to tell him off and fight with him. And, you know, she says that, I also started, saying all sorts of things to him justifiably. And she said he would just listen to me in silence. So, but I think after some point, even she couldn't really take it. It was just very difficult.
Yeah, I did wonder this, whether she stuck it out in this peculiar relationship, because he would, why I'm saying peculiar is because he would scurry off to the hills to be with this um, other lady he had, and he would never commit to even full heartedly to the other lady, but because he was probably just too comfortable, as you rightly said at the beginning of the conversation, in a well-oiled household. Everything was being done for him, and he just had to, you know s- exist on his own terms. And it it is, I mean, and given the fact that she knew very well that she was responsible for everything in the house, in the caregiving, the finances, the household, running it, tickety boo, everything. And yet there was this grip of the marriage. And finally, at one point, she says, thank heavens I listened to somebody and, invested in a DDA flat, because that was my security. It made me move. And I kept thinking, oh my goodness, this lady has done everything what the women's movement keeps telling women to do. And yet and yet she was caught in this trap.
So I think, to just come to Rajendraji for a minute, I think if you're using today's terminology, we would say he was commitment phobic, right? And he was he was the kind of person who didn't want, even in a relationship, anyone to have a claim over him or a right over him, or to expect anything from him other than what he would give of his own volition. And she was obviously, not, she wasn't thinking like that. I just want to say that sometimes today's young women forget that we stand on the shoulders of women like Manuji, who fought so many things in their life. For one, she fought to go and work. Jaya, today, who thinks it's a big deal to go out and work? Nobody. Because it's just everybody works, it's all sorts of women, young girls work. It's normal. But at that time, it wasn't. And she fought with her, I mean, to the, her father disapproved of it, but she went and worked. There were not many Hindi women writers. There were just three of them, really. There was Manuji, there was Usha Priyambada, there was Krishna Sopti, and they were working women, they were writers, um, they were working women at a time when, as I said, it was not the norm. She was in a difficult marriage, but she was also in love with her husband. And she made attempts to break free of her marriage 2, 3 times. And then he would often apologize, and he would, say he would just come back, and she would take him back. But in the end, she decided, bus, enough is enough. So even that, to take this step in your 60s, it's not easy. And she did it. And as you said, she worked, she got a house for herself, so she always had a roof over her head. She had, put her money into whatever savings she could. She ran her house, she was independent. And yeah, so a lot of what women should do today, yes, we can say that she should probably have walked out of a marriage earlier because they were so ill matched, and because he was not interested in domesticity at all. But again, I come back to my point that relationships are difficult, and love is so inexplicable sometimes. She says, "Jo bhi ho, mujhe Rajendra se prem tha." And the other odd thing is, Jaya, that while she was living in this difficult marriage, she was constantly writing and she was enormously successful. And she thought, okay, my marriage is a difficult, stressful marriage. I have so much tension in my life. So when I leave my husband, my life is going to be peaceful and I can sit and devote myself to writing. And she couldn't write. She just couldn't write. Yeah, so I think, writing and literature was a bridge between the two of them. When she left him, somewhere that writing broke also, you know. And she says that when the writer in me was to the fore, I managed even those, difficult years of my marriage. But when the wife in me came to the fore, the writer in me kind of stepped back. So she never got her writing back, really. So it's such a, I mean, it's such a strange situation, isn't it?
It is, and it is, and it is something which is, in some ways, it's such a modern memoir. It is so moving. It's so, because even subsequent generations, when they read it, they will always find something in it that will resonate with them. There will always be something. There is a kind of a, I mean, as brutally honest as you can be in a memoir, because she immediately defines it as a story. So it's, you are picky about the moments you choose and what you choose, and it just so happens that this memoir has a companion volume with her husband. So there is a way of getting a maybe a different perspective. Who knows? But it is, at the end of the day, if you read it on it by itself, it is a fine documentation of a woman's story, and it's surprising how these kinds of storytelling never get stale.
No, it doesn't. And Jaya, what I was so amazed when I read it is how frank she is, and how, despite being so popular and successful, she is constantly besieged by self doubt. She keeps thinking, am I really good enough? Is this just a fluke? I don't know. I mean, when everything she does is successful, her life is successful, her work is successful, her readers love her, she still constantly is besieged by self doubt. And don't you and I know so many modern women who are successful, and yet somewhere they have this imposter syndrome that, do I really deserve this? Am I good enough? Because, you have been raised in so many ways, or the milieu in which you grew up has taught you not to be confident about yourself. I mean, we still live in times where women are not given that confidence in their upbringing. And
Across socioeconomic classes, irrespective, it's so true, irrespective of the way stories are played out in the media and on streaming platforms. It is always across socioeconomic classes. There is no difference there.
so that's what I think. She fought against all that, and in the end, she did what she had to do. And so many of her friends were pressurizing her to take Rajendraji back into her life. And she said, no, it's done. And then after they separate, she says in a long bit at the end of the book, so what is our relationship today? Are we friends? No. Are we enemies? No. But we have a connection. There's something still there, you know? And she says maybe a lot of women will say, what is this? Why do you have this connection at all? But she says that's how it is. But you are so right. She was a courageous woman, a very talented woman, and she has written her memoir fearlessly, She has not been scared to turn the sort of, she's unsparing of herself also, she says about herself that I don't know why I did that, or I don't know why I put up with this. But and she was a pioneer, I think, who wrote these stories, and who sort of flouted social norms and rules to do what she felt she had to do at every step. And her life was a life of struggle, but it was also a life of fulfillment. And I think there's a lot to learn for even contemporary modern women, for women, young women also today. And not learn, that sounds like a bad, I mean, it sounds not, but you know what I'm trying to say.
No, no, you can say learn. No, you can say learn because everyone knows perfectly well that when you pick up something and read in solitude and reflect, it speaks to you volumes more than a conversation, whether on a one-to-one or in a group, will make ever any difference. There is something about however painful it may be, it or however peace it may give you, but if you see something on the page in the written word, it gives you a perspective on your own life. It sometimes helps you articulate what you yourselves are going. Look, there are very few of us, and we continue to be a minority, who can articulate what we feel, what we see, what we experience, what is happening around us, contextualize and hold our own. Whether it creates a conflict or not is immaterial. We know that identities are important and they should not be scrubbed. A lot of women, I fear, fail miserably at that for no fault of their own, except that they have been socially sensitized to a certain way. And a memoir like Manu Bhandari's is will play an extremely important role by the very fact that you have made the bridge as a translator from Hindi into English by making it available to a larger milieu. And I think that is extremely important. There's nothing wrong in it being just reserved for the Hindi reading public, but a larger reading public should access a memoir like this when it can speak volumes. Thank you so much, Poonam, for doing this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jaya. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And I just hope people understand this remarkable woman and her combination of strength and vulnerability, you know, and all the things she did in her life, which was so admirable. And I'm so happy that English speaking readers can now read this book.